Good morning and welcome to the Forum at St. Bart's, where each week we explore issues at the intersection of faith and the modern world. I'm Peter Thompson, Associate Rector for Formation and Liturgy here. Today we'll be talking about the Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma, and the scary ways in which social media has transformed our lives. I'm delighted to be joined for this conversation by Vicki Curtis, a filmmaker, writer, and story architect who specializes in adapting true stories for the stage and screen. She was one of 3 screenwriters for The Social Dilemma and has worked on several other films, including the Emmy-winning Chasing Coral, available on Netflix. She is currently working on Comparsa, her directorial debut. Vicki joins us this morning from Boulder, Colorado. Thank you so much, Vicki, for getting up early to talk with us.
Yes. I'm happy to be here.
So let's start with the title of the film. You called it The Social Dilemma. Can you describe briefly what you and the team thought the dilemma is?
Sure. So much is the dilemma. That's sort of how the film starts off, is asking all these sort of tech experts, so what's the problem? And the difficulty to really put it in a sentence is a lot of why it is such a problem, is it's hard to explain. But part of it, I think, is that we as social beings, we want that connection. We want to be able to check in with our niece and nephew who live across the country, or with friends we haven't seen in a long time, or with the community we feel that we are a part of, and the only way we can connect with that community is using a social network. And so we have a natural impulse to connect, and then the dilemma being that these platforms that we believe connect us to each other and to information actually have another purpose, and their purpose is to make money, and the way they do that is through their ability to sort of manipulate our beliefs and our behaviors, and sell their ability to do that to the highest bidder. That's what's going on in their advertising team, which is sort of the behind the scenes part of these big companies like Facebook and Google. So their intentions are not aligned with our intentions. And there are all these negative side effects that we're seeing really clearly in the last few years via whether it's, misinformation about coronavirus, or, the ability for a dictator to persuade the opinions of everyone in his country by placing certain kinds of political advertisements and false information online. So that's the social dilemma, is we want to be able to connect, but not necessarily in this way where we are also susceptible to manipulation. And
There's been kind of growing awareness of the negative aspects of social media for years. I wonder what you expected when you embarked on this project, and what surprised you along the way. Were you more concerned by the end of this than you were before? And what was most surprising as you investigated the issue?
Sure, yeah, that's a great question. I think at first my thought was like, well, yeah, I know I look at my phone too much. And I thought of it as a personal problem that we all were regulating for ourselves. Like, oh, I don't use social media, so it's fine. Or, yeah, I look at my phone too much, but whatever. Or I try not to look at it on the weekends when I'm with my family, so it doesn't matter. We're all regulating sort of a personal addiction to these devices, whether it's like you can't go through a dinner conversation without Googling the answer to some question that comes up in conversation, or you find yourself clicking through to Instagram or TikTok or Facebook. Your thumb does it for you before your brain is even realizing that that's where you're going to. It's like such a go-to that it's become a subconscious habit. And that's the part I thought, was the problem. And I thought, I don't know if that's worth making a movie about. Everybody knows that already. But the more that our team, Jeff and Larissa and me and a bunch of other folks, the more that our team dug in and interviewed folks, the more I realized that that's really not the problem. The problem is the side effects of what's happening in society, the real world harms, because we're all looking at these devices that have the ability to be so manipulative without us even noticing that we're being manipulated. So, one thing I was very surprised by was like that Facebook ran an experiment on Facebook users without their knowledge, where they wanted to test whether or not they could persuade people to vote. And I think, with a group of tens of thousands of Facebook users, they looked into, okay, well, if we put in their news feed, pictures of people who have voted that they're friends with versus just names of people who have voted that they're friends with, will, those two groups, the pictures group and the names group, have different results on how many of those people go vote today? And showing the pictures increased the likelihood that the user would go vote. So now Facebook is realizing they have power over like the real world. They have power over how many Americans vote, and hypothetically which Americans vote. And so realizing that sort of real world power, I think they thought it was just cool or something. And then, we see that it actually has all of these negative consequences when it comes to other people realizing Facebook can be a tool for changing people's behavior and sharing, false information, or targeting a particular group of people and not turning into real world targeting of that group of people, etc. So I think when I realized it was like a society level problem, that these platforms were making it harder for us as humans to understand each other, to get together and solve our real problems like climate change or political polarity. Those were the problems that really made me feel like it was worth making a film.
So I did look up your personal Instagram, which is still up there, and your last post was from September 2020 when the film came out. And in the post, you mentioned that until you got on to promote the film, you hadn't been on Instagram for over a year, because of all the stuff you were learning in making the film. And I'm wondering how making the film changed your own personal approach to social media, and also how it informed how you advise family and friends. I know you have a child. How you're planning on talking to your child about their own social media use going into the future.
Another good question. For me, about halfway into this project, I sort of just started feeling grossed out by these companies. The team was reading Shoshana Zuboff's seminal works, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, where she really outlines, like, I just am so impressed with how much research that woman did. She outlines, day by day, how Google invented the business model that changed capitalism, and where now the most valuable resource on Earth is no longer a natural resource, it's data. And the richest companies on Earth are the companies that have gotten the best at using that data to predict the future. And if they can predict our future behaviors, they know how to sort of manipulate us into groups and get us to do, whatever the person advertising with them wants us to do, whether it's click on the next article, subscribe to this thing, go out and buy something we wouldn't have otherwise bought, or change what we believe is true. And so, her work in just laying out, like, step by step how these companies came to decide to do that, and in how in every way they are taking advantage of us being online to surveil us, both in what we do online, tracking everywhere we go, but also tracking how fast we scroll in a given day, or where our mouse goes on the computer. And in doing so, they can start to make predictions about our personality type. And it all just got so gross to me. I don't want Google predicting my personality type and then using it against me. Especially was alarmed by some of the other stories in other countries, like what happened in Myanmar, where an already sort of a minority that already had less political and social power was targeted. The Rohingya Muslims were targeted by the Buddhists in Myanmar largely because of false information they read online. It was a campaign by Buddhist monks to gain more power, and the real world harms of that, where we've had tens of thousands, if not 100,000 people murdered or displaced as a result of an online campaign against them. It just felt like too upsetting to use the platforms anymore. So what I did was take them off my phone. And once I did that, I realized like how easy it was to not go click over. I found myself not going on my computer to get to them anymore. So I made it a little bit harder for my body to like physically get to Instagram.com or to Facebook, and I stopped using them. So I think it was freed up time in my life, and made me feel better about not sort of feeding that algorithm by giving it more and more data to sort of get better and better at manipulating people around the world. So for me, I think learning this stuff made me want to just not be a user at all. They actually make it so difficult to delete your account. I tried to delete my Facebook one day, and it's like hard to actually figure out how to do because they have every reason to want you to stay on. And if I need to sort of like look someone up, but for a work related thing, I still have that account, but I really haven't needed it. And so, maybe I'll go back in and try to figure out how to technically delete them, but I'm pleased that I at least no longer use them.
So in telling the story, you and the rest of the team made this decision to intersperse these interviews with a kind of fictional narrative that brought to life some of the issues that were being talked about in a more abstract way in the interviews. And I'm curious why you made that decision and how effective you thought it was.
Sure. So I think at first what we had done all the interviews first, and sort of starting to cut those together in the editing process. It is just so dense with information. And at the same time, we were also finding and being sent all these articles that were these more personal accounts. And we were like thinking about like, okay, well, there's a great New York Times piece by a man who talks about how he was politically radicalized on YouTube, like how it happened for him, that he went from feeling like he was pretty sort of like attached to reality and understanding reality, and then getting sucked farther and farther into these conspiracy rabbit holes, and eventually getting out of it, lucky for him, and writing this piece about how that had happened. But so we were like, okay, well, we don't want to necessarily tell any one person's story, because there's so many different ways that that manipulation can happen. We're also seeing all these stories of the way young kids are affected, and how it messes up their sort of dopamine deficit states, where they feel like they can't get the happy, like the hit of happiness, unless they're getting their likes on their latest post, or unless they're maintaining their streak on Snapchat, etc. So there's many ways that addiction or disconnection from reality and all these different things can happen for folks. So we thought maybe we could sort of imagine a family that was a composite of a lot of the different stories that we were hearing. And at one point that script was like even more blown out, where we saw more of what was going on with the mom's world and the dad's world. And Cassandra, the daughter who does not use social media, and at the end of the day, we had to sort of pare it back and make it fit the film. But we really wanted to just make make all of the esoteric things we were talking about feel more real and grounded in the true life of an American family. Because I think a lot of people are feeling the effects at that level. You know, they know they can't get their kid to look away from their phone. They know their kid is stressed out by what's happening on their phone, or you know, they themselves feel like, oh my gosh, I can't stop reading the news. It's, you know, I need to know what's happening next, so there's all these different cycles that I think are really familiar to us, and we want to make that connection. You know, this was designed to be this way. It was designed to prey upon your fears, doubts, and insecurities, to keep you on the platform. In keeping you on the platform, looking at content that is sponsored, that's the only way the company has to make money.
In that fictional narrative, the young man in the family is radicalized by this movement called the Extreme Center. And I'm curious how you chose to name it the Extreme Center. Was that a way of not being accused of bias from either side? And by naming it the Extreme Center, were you trying to suggest that the threats are kind of equal on the right and on the left?
You know, yeah, I mean, to some degree, we didn't want to pin any particular extreme group and say, you know, this is the only group who's receiving misinformation online, because that's not true. Like, anyone who uses these devices is seeing information that is, you know, more biased or not particularly researched, or, you know, the stuff that rises to the top is chosen by an algorithm, and the algorithm chooses the things that it thinks you'll click on. And the algorithm has realized, as it does, you know, trillions of little research experiments every day on all of us. It's realized, oh, people can't help but look at something that seems outrageous. They can't help but look at something that references them in particular. That's why Facebook will say, hey, someone tagged you in a picture. And they don't show you the picture. They just say someone tagged you. And so then you're like, oh, wait, well, what am I doing? How am I being represented? And, you know, these are normal impulses. We want to be protected against outrageous behavior. We want to know how we're being represented in our community. Those are all normal human impulses. But the platform has sort of figured out how to use that normal psychology against us. And so, so I feel like I've fully lost track of your question now.
Well, the Extreme Center and
oh, yeah.
You know, what that says about the right and the left,
yeah.
if anything.
And I mean, we did find, like, there's lots of data to suggest that there was more, there were more there was more misinformation and disinformation being targeted at conservatives in, for instance, the 2016 election. But that, you know, I wasn't like that. The point of the film was not to say like that any one group of people is receiving more misinformation. It's just that we all are. And some of it is like not political at all, you know, with the flat earth conspiracy. That is not something that, you know, you know, you don't have to be on the right or the left to sort of get into that YouTube rabbit hole. And that is really a rabbit hole. You know, the YouTube, which is Google, has suggested flat earth videos millions of times to people who haven't searched for them. So, you know, with their sort of automatic suggestion of the next video and the next video, the algorithm once again has realized that a great way to get people to stay for the next video is to have the next video be a little more extreme than the video before. So sort of no matter who you are in your political identity or your personal identity, if you search for something on YouTube, it's likely to show you something that's slightly more extreme than what your current view is, and then the video after that will be even more extreme. So it's sort of polarizing everyone into an extreme view, whether it's in a conspiracy or in politics or what have you. So that is why we said extreme center was like, you know, that's sort of like the most absurd version, is to even make centrists somehow extreme, but it can happen.
At one point in the film, one of the experts interviewed is asked, "What are you most concerned about in the future?" And he says, "In the short term, civil war." And the film came out in September 2020. Only a few months later, you have the insurrection at the Capitol. Was that chilling at all? Just how close that all happened together?
Yeah, very much so. That was Tim Kendall, and he was very sort of early and high up in Facebook in the early days when Facebook was figuring out how to go from being a service to being a money-making platform. And they looked at Google and said, oh, that thing they're doing where they're taking, you know, all the data they have about a person's personal life and personality and everything they've ever done online, and they're using that to create like a voodoo doll of that person that they can then test things on, this model of you that they've created, and figure out what's most likely to get you, what's most likely to get you to click, what's most likely to persuade your behavior. And they said, oh, we want to do that. So Tim I think feels like, wow, I can't believe at one point I was in the headspace of admiring this business model and choosing this business model for the company I'm at. But he was, you know, part of that. And just, I say that to say, like, this is someone who is very, very deep in the system and informed on what's going on at these companies. And yeah, so for his short-term concern to be civil war, you know, at the time that we filmed that, we were like, should we even put this in the film? Is it too hyperbolic? But it was what he thought, you know, so we don't have to, we didn't have to share every thought with our subjects. We wanted to show you what they were thinking because they were the people most in the know. And you know, he turned out to be like too close to right. And that was definitely chilling. It was pretty wild to see, again, like sort of an idea sprout on Twitter and Facebook have such incredible impact in the real world.
So I encourage you, if you have questions for Vicki, to send them in using YouTube and Facebook. You can use the live chat function on YouTube. You can use the comments function on Facebook, or you can email me, pthompson@stbarts.org. That's pthompson@stbarts.org. Shows how ubiquitous these platforms are, because we're using them even to have this conversation. I'm curious, as the questions come in, Vicki, if what are the solutions to this problem? There are some solutions on an individual level proposed at the end of the film. Obviously, there's collective systemic solutions as well. What do you think are the key solutions based on the work you've done?
My dog is like right here telling me like me to throw her toy. I don't know if you can like see this little doggy nose.
Guest star.
Maybe in a minute. You gotta give me sorry about that. Solutions: go play with your dog outside instead of being online. So our production company that made the film is lucky enough to have the funding to also, you know, pursue the funding to also have an impact team. And what they do is really think about, okay, if we want this film to be seen, how do we make sure it gets seen? And if we want it to have an impact, as opposed to just people watching it feeling like, oh wow, that was a lot, and then everything going back to normal, how do we make sure that, you know, it does everything it can in the world to help people make positive change? So that impact team has done the work of focusing our ideas about what the solutions can be. And if you want to know more about that, I would recommend going to thesocialdilemma.com. I don't make money for saying that. I'm just letting you know there's a ton of resources there in terms of current events on what people are trying to do, suggestions for how to handled this conversation with your kids, you know, what to do in your own life, how to sort of take a break from social media and reset. But, you know, we've broken the impact goals into, you know, how you use social media, changing how you use it, changing how it's designed in the first place, and changing how it's regulated. Um, so there are, you know, as Shoshana Zuboff would say, there are many industries that are now a conversation is happening between my daughter and partner, so there's that for Zoom. Um, so we want to make sure that people have access to being able to sort of change in their personal life, say, okay, if I don't want this thing in my face as much, you know, I can take these apps off my phone. I can take notifications off my phone. I can turn my phone to monochrome color because it's actually tricks your brain into thinking it's less interesting if something isn't bright and shiny and colorful. So we have those sorts of tips for personally how to monitor. And then we're also doing our best to talk to designers about how do you have humane design for these things, because as you said, you know, as people, if people are accessing this information and other communities that are important to them through Facebook and through YouTube, you know, we don't want necessarily for no one to be able to access their social network on through a platform. It's that, you know, we want there to be an option of a platform that doesn't also manipulate. So asking designers, what would be the humane solution? How do we offer a place to connect that's not also trying to addict? How do we offer people a place to share their opinion that's not also sort of amplifying the most extreme voices? And the least nuanced voices. And so really hoping that designers can think critically about whether or not they want the next big platform to look the way Google and Facebook look, or, you know, even folks who work at those companies to think critically about the product they're making and to think about whether or not they can be changed from the inside. And then also, we want to think about how these products are regulated. And before I mentioned Shoshana Zuboff, she talks about how there's plenty of markets that we outlaw because they have inherent negative consequences. Like we outlaw slavery, we outlaw a trade in human organs because they have negative consequences inherently. And if we outlawed the trade of human futures, which is the trade that Google and Facebook are a part of, where they're mining our brains and our attention for their product, for their profit, the way that we used to mine a hillside for gold, you know, do we want to be mined in that way and in a totally unregulated space? So really hoping that Congress can catch up to a full understanding of how the business model works and think about the business model when they think about what to regulate and how to regulate these companies, you know, for what is best for the general population.
We have a question from a parent who is wondering about the fact that Google is now in classrooms. Should we be concerned about these companies now becoming part of the educational system and getting involved with our children from a very young age?
I am very concerned about that. You know, my daughter is young, so I haven't had to face that yet. But I am already thinking, oh my gosh, like, am I going to have to do research to find a school in my area that doesn't sort of give them Google accounts when they turn 6? And it is alarming to think like you're sort of like turning your kid over to their influence at such a young age, and they're building a model of who your kid is so that they can control and manipulate that person's behavior for the sake of their advertisers. And like, that's just not, that doesn't feel good, right? Like none of us think that's a good idea to addict kids to dopamine substances. We don't let them, you know, try heroin. We don't let them try cigarettes when they're 6. Why would we want them, you know, on YouTube for hours and hours a day? So Tristan, another character in the film, he talks about, there used to be Saturday morning cartoons, and kids would, all across the country, kids would tune into Saturday morning cartoons, but those actually were highly regulated. What you could advertise during Saturday morning cartoons, and what the content was, because there was a general understanding that we wanted to, like, in general, protect our kids and their entertainment from certain. Oh no, you're frozen. Does that mean I'm frozen?
We could hear you. So you froze up for a bit, but I heard everything.
You were frozen for a moment?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. Yes, so that's a concern. Now that space of Saturday morning cartoons has sort of been taken over by YouTube, which is a totally unregulated Wild West of a place, and there's no control over what is advertised to your kid during that time, or even what content they see, or what video is recommended next. And so it's not necessarily enriching their lives. And I think we can all get behind the fact that we don't want to be mining our children for data, and we don't want to be manipulating them from a young age. And so I think, I really would love for schools to see the film, for school administrators to see the film and think critically about, are there other ways that we can connect directly with our students without sort of doing it through this third party that has nefarious goals?
It's interesting that you mentioned Saturday morning cartoons, because we have several questions about TV, and pointing out that, there were concerns about TV decades ago and the effect that would have on kids and the rest of us, and sort of concerns about technology are as old as technology itself. What differences do you see between the radio era and the TV era, and now the smartphone, social media era? What is particularly concerning about this moment, and what concerns have been shared across those periods of time?
Sure. I think I'm somewhat of a Luddite, so I think it is always good to ask questions about not only the positive effects of a technology, but to think about whether or not it's going to have negative effects, or which communities it is more likely to have negative effects for. And so I honor that there are also concerns about things going on television, and how people are sort of hooked into that world, and misinformation on that world too. But I just can't stress enough how much more powerful the AI that runs Google and the AI that run Facebook are at micro-targeting messages to billions of people all day, every day, where their ability to say, oh, you want to change the minds of 40,000 people in this area in this state about such and such, and you want to do it in the next 2 weeks. Okay, that's going to cost this much money. We'll find you 40,000 people who are susceptible to that information. And TV never has had the ability to micro-target in that way. So you see ads on TV, and yes, we're susceptible to advertising. That's why it exists, is because it works. Otherwise, companies would not spend money on it. But the ability to sort of hyper-target and hyper-deliver the real world change in it for so little money. I think it was something like, to influence every person in Uganda, to show every one of the Facebook users in Uganda a video, would cost you roughly $100,000. So we're not talking like, it's way less than a Super Bowl ad to have this much influence over people. So I think the amount of computing power that exists in these two AIs is unfathomable to us. They have rooms of computers that are all interconnected with each other, that take up huge areas of the desert, that exist under the ocean. And all of those computers, what we're asking them to do is to build little models of us based on around 29,000 pieces of data they have about each of us, and figure out how we work and how to change our behavior. We could be asking those AI to solve any problem, right? But So I think part of the concern is also, wow, we have this amazing technology that's so much more powerful than something like television or radio. But what are we asking it to do? Certainly nothing that is going to benefit humankind.
What do you think, if anything, is good about social media as it exists right now? You've made the decision yourself to kind of step away from it, but we've hinted that, you know, at least the kind of original stated mission of Facebook to connect everyone might be a good mission. One of our commenters pointed out that, you know, he gets online every Sunday morning and the first thing that YouTube recommends is our programs from St. Bart's. So it's helping him to connect something he wants to be connected to, and it's helping St. Bart's by making sure we're foremost in his mind. I became a priest in the social media generation and found that micro-targeting ads was much more effective and efficient for churches as well. We used to spend, you know, hundreds of dollars on print ads, and we could spend a smaller amount of money and get to people that were going to really respond to our ads. And you know, that same quality of social media can be abused, but it was also really effective for this small nonprofit organization. So is there anything good? Is there any good news in all of this, or is it kind of all bad?
I mean, I think we all are very familiar with the good parts of social media. Those are the parts that they show. Those are the parts that is the story of social media and Google's search platform, and YouTube, etc. Like, we can all think of 1,000 reasons that they're personally, enjoyable or useful or add value to our lives. I think the part that is hard to see are the negative consequences, because that's the part that they have done a really, really active campaign to cover up. So I think that was sort of the point of the movie, was to balance the conversation and balance people's understanding of yes, of course, like I mentioned before, connecting with family who lives across the country, connecting with a community of folks. If you live in a super rural place and you feel like no one is like you in your town, you can go online and find people who are like you and they are into what you're into, and you can feel accepted and you can feel like you belong. And so there's certainly all of those stories I think we're familiar with. And the question is, should we have to trade away our agency and trade away the validity of our democracy and trade away our ability to find truth and agree on what's true? Should we have to trade away all of that information and all of that sense of understanding and a sense of self? Should we have to trade away our dopamine balance in our brain for that sort of connection? And I would hope that people say no. I don't want to make that trade, and that we could design a platform that gave you the service that Facebook is saying they give you without making the cost, or taking the cost, the toll on humanity that Facebook is pretending, isn't happening, or would like you to not be aware of.
We just have a few minutes left, so if you have a final question for Vicki, I encourage you to send it in now using some of the very same platforms we're talking about, the live chat function on YouTube, the comments function on Facebook, or you can email me, pthompson@stbarts.org, pthompson@stbarts.org. One questioner wonders about the kind of latest trend in social media, Clubhouse, which, unlike most of the platforms which have focused on pictures and video and text and articles and such, this platform is focused on audio. Do you think there's anything different about this platform and the impact it will have? Uh-oh, it seems like we froze up again. Can you hear me, Vicki?
I can. You were asking about Clubhouse.
Yes, and if there's anything different about the impact Clubhouse will have.
I have never heard of Clubhouse, so.
Oh, wow.
That's how I feel about that.
Got it. It's a platform that, you know, is an audio chat, and it's kind of the latest trend, kind of Twitter for audio a little bit. These kind of audio rooms. But we'll move on since you haven't kind of researched that.
Well, what I'll say is that the harms, most of the harms derive from the business model, using an extractive advertising business model where we are the resource, and we are being, you know, our time, our attention, and our beliefs are being extracted for the profit of the company. So if Clubhouse uses an extractive, attention-based business model, an advertising-based business model, I would, yes, I would be very cautious if they are not monetized or do not monetize in that way. You know, if they are subscription based or some other kind of service. You know, Wikipedia is free to users, but it is actually just a service. It's not going to show you a different result than it shows someone else. So if we all went and researched St. Bart's on Wikipedia, we would get the same information. If we go down a YouTube rabbit hole about St. Bart's, we might get totally different information. So you know, thinking in those terms, what's the business model of this website or this platform, and is it aligned with my goals or with my humanity, or is it, you know, built in such a way that it is trying to mine me for its profit?
Do you think platforms will ever pay users for their data? That was a question someone sent in. Is that a possible model for the future?
That's a good question. And I know that idea is out there, is to sort of disincentivize the collection of just all data everywhere all the time. You know, Google is tracking where you go in the real world. If you have Google apps on your phone, or if you have a Google phone, like an Android. So like when would they not want to know exactly where you are? And, you know, what would it ever be? Would the tax be so high that they would really be disincentivized from tracking and surveilling you and using that to manipulate you? I don't know what that would have to look like to really sort of break the business model where surveillance was no longer the goal. And I think that's what we should be looking at, is like, how do we move away from surveillance capitalism, you know, given that no one wants to be an extracted resource, and think about less extractive models of being here on Earth with each other and with nature as well. Thinking about less deleterious models of making it and being with each other. So, you know, I don't know that that's like inherently problematic. I just don't know that it would be a complete enough solution.
What kind of ethical discernment is going on right now in these tech companies? Are there ethics departments that are actively asking these questions? Or is the conversation all informal? And is there any kind of movement within these companies to transform their business model or their approach ethically?
Another great question. I have the understanding, based on limited data, that to some degree, some of these companies would actually welcome regulation from Congress, because they feel that they're bound to their responsibility to their shareholders to continue to grow profit. And so until Congress or another regulatory body were to step in and say, no, you've crossed the line, here's the line, we're holding the line, you know, we don't want this business model to be having this effect on young children. We don't want, you know, it hiking suicide rates among young girls. We don't think that this is working. We're going to set a line, set a boundary, or set many boundaries, because it's a multifaceted issue. I think they would actually, honestly, to some degree, welcome finding the edge of the swimming pool and saying, okay, we can only try to profit within these boundaries. And so, yeah, the companies are extremely private and extremely secretive. And so I am not privy to a lot of what's going on. I know there have been people who have quit Google and Facebook, like in sort of loud ways recently, saying the company is not taking certain things seriously and I'm out. Or then I was trying to raise concerns about, racial discrimination and the way that these algorithms are actually furthering racial discrimination instead of being an antidote, and feeling as though the company was not looking to really put resources into fixing that. And so there's certainly some naysayers who are either still working there or have decided that they can't fix this problem from the inside. So I think part of the problem with these companies is how secretive they are and how little they have to report about what they are doing. We have no idea what they're doing, really. So I think that is definitely part of the problem.
Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have this morning. I do want to reiterate that you can go to thesocialdilemma.com for some of the resources Vicki has talked about. Some of you have asked, what do we do now? And there are practical tips laid out there for exactly how you can shift your approach to social media, thesocialdilemma.com. And some of you have asked, how can I see the movie? It's on Netflix. So as long as you have a Netflix subscription, just type in The Social Dilemma and you should find it pretty easily. Thank you so much. I know it's early out.
Or your friend has a Netflix subscription.
Yep. Yeah. However you can get onto Netflix, The Social Dilemma is on Netflix. Vicki, I know it's early out in Colorado. We're really grateful that you took the time to be with us this morning.
Absolutely. It was a great conversation. Thanks for connecting.
And thank you all for watching. If you've appreciated this conversation or any of the other conversations we've hosted recently, I encourage you to give generously at stbarts.org/giving so that we can continue to bring in engaging guests who challenge and inform our perspectives on the world. I also encourage you to join us next week. We'll be welcoming Professor Shelly Rambo of Boston University. We'll be talking about the connection between resurrection and trauma. And I hope that you'll stick around and join us for worship at 11 a.m. Thanks so much, Vicki. Thanks so much to all of you.
Thank you.